Introduction to Taxation. So today we will learn the inherent power of taxation as a power of the state, and what are the laws and doctrines governing taxation. So we start first with knowing the three inherent powers of the state. So we have these three inherent powers of the state, which are your police power, taxation power, and your power of eminent domain. Why are these powers considered inherent? These powers are considered inherent because these powers, by the nature of taxation, by the nature of the state, these powers are already within it. It means that when a state is born, these powers are also born with it. So in case there is a state, these three powers are also present. These three powers are also present. So these three inherent powers of the state are inherent because, again, by nature of the state, once the state is born, these powers are also within it. So if ever a state is born, these three powers are also born. So for example, we have the state of Philippines. So Philippines as state is born. So when Philippines is born, we also have these three inherent powers with it. That is the police power, taxation power, and the power of eminent domain. Now we go and define these three different powers. We start first with police power. What is police power? Police power is the power to make and implement laws. Power to make and implement the laws. Okay, so it is the power to make and implement the laws. When you say power to make and implement the laws, it is shared by your legislative and your executive. It is shared by your legislative and executive. So the legislative will make the law and the executive will implement the law. Next, we have your taxation power. It is the power to enforce contribution to raise government funds. So enforce contribution to raise government funds. And normally, these contributions is used by the sovereign through its lawmaking body to defray the expenses of the government. Okay, so if ever we have a tax law through the legislative, and we use this tax law to enforce contribution among the citizens or the people to pay taxes. Okay, and what is the purpose of this tax? That is to defray the expenses of the government. Defray the expenses of the government. Okay, so that is the taxation power. The power to enforce contribution to raise government funds to defray the expenses of the government. We go now to your power of eminent domain. This is the third inherent power of the state. The power of eminent domain is the power to take private property, power to take private property for public use upon payment of just compensation. Okay, so you will take a private property in a power of eminent domain, and the purpose is for public use, but you need to pay a sum certain in money. So for example, you have here lot A, private property, lot B, private property. So A and B. Now you want to create a road which traverses the lot of A and B. So this portion, dyan ka gagawa ng road. So makukuha yung property ni A at ni B. First question, is the road for public use? The answer is yes. Next, can you take just the property? No. In taking the property, you must pay just compensation. So you pay just compensation for the taking of the private property. So normally you will just take this part. You need to pay just compensation. And the just compensation of that property is the fair value of the property. The fair value of property A and property B. Okay, so you take the property for public use. So what is the public use in our example? The public use here is the road. And the payment of the fair value of the property is the just compensation. So I have no problem with police power. I know you have a full graphs of your police power. Taxation power, that is as to tax eminent domain, taking of private property upon payment of just compensation for public use. Now, we ascertain the differences as to these three inherent powers. So what are the differences as to these three inherent powers of the state? So first, difference is as to the application, So how does your police power applies? Your police power applies to all, It can apply to properties, it can apply to persons, it can apply to rights, it can apply to privileges, it can apply to obligations. Why? Because the legislative or the state can regulate anything. We can pass anything. Just like now, they want to pass a law which regulates Netflix or online streaming. So they want to regulate internet now. Okay, so police power really is broad in its application. It can regulate anything. How about your taxation power? Is it broad in application? If ever you have done your reading, you have came across this characteristics of taxation, which is your COPS. So first is comprehensive, unlimited, plenary, and supreme. Okay, so I know you have come across those items. So maybe you're asking, why is it called unlimited? So when I say unlimited, it doesn't mean that the power is so absolute or the application of taxation is so absolute that it is unlimited. When we say it is unlimited, it is only unlimited as to the amount you can impose. It is only unlimited as to the amount you can impose. However, it is not unlimited as to the power of taxation. Why? You will learn soon that the power of taxation is not absolute due to the fact that it is subject to any limitation. And those limitations comes from your constitutional limitations and inherent limitations. So take note, the power of taxation as to application is not absolute. Why? Because of your inherent and constitutional limitations. How about the application of your eminent domain? The application of your eminent domain is only when you take private property. That's only when you take private property. Okay, so application of police power is broad because you can regulate everything, anything. Taxation, the application is not unlimited or not absolute because, again, it is subject to inherent and constitutional limitations. Eminent domain, the application is only on the taking of private property. So you can only use the power of eminent domain to take private property. Okay? You can use the power of police power to regulate anything. Next, as to the effect of property taken. What is the effect of property taken under your police power? So the property taken in a police power is either destroyed or impounded. So normally you can see the items of regulating authorities wherein they try to impound properties. So for example, bus, and then the bus violated the traffic rules. So the police can impound the bus of the bus operator. So when we say impound, it will just stay on the area of the regulators. How about if destroyed? If destroyed, they will really destroy it. They will really destroy it in whatever means. So for example, remember the issue in the Bilibid prison wherein they confiscated different gadgets, etc. So that is part of our regulation or police power. Now, what they did on that different gadgets is that they let it be destroyed by a certain vehicle. So there was a clamor coming from the public not to destroy those items and rather give it to those who need it. However, since again the police power can destroy the property that is taken out of regulation, then they can just do that. They can just do that. How about in your taxation? Do we take property? The answer is no. In taxation, we do not take property. So no taking of property in taxation. Why? Because tax is generally payable in money. Generally payable in money. Therefore, whenever you have tax or you have a tax due, you cannot tell the government just to collect or get your property. You cannot pay your property out of your tax. You cannot pay property. You cannot pay your tax out of your property. You cannot pay your tax out of your property because a tax is payable in money. Tax is payable in money. However, in certain instance, you can make use of your property to pay your tax. So in case you cannot really pay, you don't have enough money, etc., etc., and the last thing that the government can do so that the government can collect the tax is to get your property. And we call that your levy or distinct. So levy or distraint of personal or real property. Levy or distraint of personal or real property. So this only happens if ever the taxpayer cannot really pay. So the tax authority would either levy or distraint your property. Would either levy or distraint your property. Next, as to eminent domain. As to eminent domain, do we have a property taken? Yes, the property taken is made for public use. So it will be transformed for public use or it will only be there for public use. Okay, so police power, there is a property taken for regulation. Taxation, we do not take property, but we take money as payment of the tax. However, in certain instances, we also take the property through levy or distraint. Eminent domain, of course, we take property for public use. Okay, so we're done with these three items. Yeah, we're done with these three items. Next difference is whether the power can be delegated or not. Whether the power can be delegated or not. Police power can be delegated. Police power can be delegated. So the legislative, the executive can legislate, the executive can just delegate the power to its different admin functions. So that is also part of delegation of power. How about taxation? Can we delegate the power of taxation? The answer is no. Why? Because it is exclusively lodged in the legislative. Exclusively lodged in the legislative. In the legislative. So only the legislative can create tax laws. Only the legislative can create tax laws, except if ever the Constitution and the laws provides otherwise. Except if the Constitution and the laws provides otherwise. So here we say general rule, taxation power cannot be delegated except if there is a constitutional provision or the laws provide for otherwise. So what are those items? So we only have three items in which taxation can be delegated. First is the power of the president to impose custom duties, taxes, fees, wharfage. Okay, so those items, duties or taxes, is delegated to president or to the president. So the president can set or impose custom duties, taxes, and also your wharfage. Next, that can be delegated. The next power that can be delegated is next person in which the power of taxation can be delegated is, of course, your local government units through your local government code. So in the creation of your local government, the local government units has the power to create their own taxes. So we call that your local taxes. Okay, so we have your local taxes for your local government units. So first one, we have the power of the president. Next, the local government units impose local taxes. Third, we have your admin delegation. Admin delegation. Again, you can delegate to the executive. You can delegate to the executive. Okay, so as to whether it can be delegated, police power and eminent domain can be delegated while taxation cannot be delegated. while taxation cannot be delegated. Next, as to the amount imposed. For police power, the amount imposed solely is based on the law. So if the law imposes 500,000 fee, that is the amount of the fee. So it is limited in nature. So whatever is the amount of the penalty under the law, that is the amount of our amount collected. While in taxation, we said it is unlimited as to the amount. Unlimited as to the amount. So the amount collectible is unlimited based on our tax laws. How about in eminent domain? Do we collect any amount? The answer is no, because in eminent domain, instead of we are collecting money, we are paying money. So, diba, we take private property, so we pay that private property as to its fair value. However, we cannot collect anything. Therefore, as to the money collected, we do not collect anything in eminent domain because there's no imposition as to amount. As to the presence of constitutional limitations, police power and eminent domain generally do not have constitutional limitations. Police power and eminent domains do not have a constitutional limitation. So what do we mean by police power and eminent domain does not have constitutional limitations, or generally is free of constitutional limitations? So what are constitutional limitations? These are limitations on the power of police and eminent domain provided under the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines. So if ever there are provisions under the Constitution which now restricts the power of police and power of eminent domain, those are called constitutional limitations. Generally, police and eminent domain does not have any constitutional limitation. However, taxation power is subject to constitutional limitations. Later, we will discuss the different constitutional limitations under the power of taxation. Okay, so we're done with this difference again. And the last difference is as to the effect of the non-impairment loss. As to the effect of the non-impairment loss. So what is the non-impairment loss? So what is the non-impairment loss? So the non-impairment loss provides that the obligations in a contract cannot be impaired by subsequent laws or rules. Non-impairment loss. The obligations in the contract, cannot be impaired by subsequent laws. The obligations cannot be impaired by subsequent laws. So, for example, A and B entered into a contract. They have stipulations. So let's say the stipulations of A and B is A will sell a smartphone to B. A will sell a smartphone to B. Now, that contract was entered in 2020. In 2021, there is a new law which provides that all smartphones should only be acquired through the government. Okay, so only all smartphones can only be purchased through the government. So here we have a contract from 2020 and there is a new law on 2021. So what does your non-impairment clause tells you? That the obligations cannot be impaired by subsequent laws. Therefore, the obligations in 2020 or under this contract will not be impaired by the subsequent law on 2021. That is the impairment clause. But what is the effect of the three inherent powers as to the non-impairment clause? So under your police power, it is superior to non-impairment clause. So even if there is a non-impairment clause under our constitution, police power in regulating that contract, the police power is more superior than the non-impairment clause. So kahit may non-impairment clause, kung sinabi na yung law is for police power, mas supreme yung police power. Mas supreme yung police power. How about under your eminent domain? So your power of eminent domain, again, is more superior than your non-impairment clause. Non-impairment clause. So if ever you will exercise the power of eminent domain, the eminent domain or the power of eminent domain will be superior than your previous contract. How about your taxation power? Can you just tax and you can impair the obligations in a contract? The answer is no, because this is inferior. This is inferior. Meaning, police power can impair the obligations in a contract. Eminent domain can impair the obligations in a contract. But taxation power, since it is inferior, if there is a new tax law, it is inferior, meaning it cannot impair. Okay, it cannot impair the obligations in the contract. So for example, there is a law in that will regulate there is a law that will regulate something, and the contract, we have here a contract. We have here a contract. Now the law will impair the obligations on that contract. Since you are exercising police power, then police power is superior. Police power is superior. Next, there is a new law which now wants to expropriate or take a private property out of a party in a contract. And due to the expropriation, there will be an impairment on their contract. So anong mangyayari? Anong mas supreme? Yung kontrata ba or yung eminent domain? Eminent domain. How about in taxation? There is a contract and there is a new tax law. A provision on the tax law impairs the provision on the contract. Who will reign supreme? Is it the taxation law or the taxation power, or is it the contract? The contract, because again, taxation power is inferior to non-impairment laws. Therefore, it cannot impair obligations in contracts. Okay, so these are the differences regarding your three inherent powers of the state. So we have your police, taxation, and eminent domain. We go now to your different theories of taxation. Different theories of taxation. So what is the use of these different theories of taxation? So these theories of taxation outlines to you why do we need a tax? Why is there a tax? Why do we need the tax? Why is there a tax? So first theory of taxation is the necessity theory. Necessity theory, also known as your theory of taxation. It is also known as your theory of taxation. So what does your necessity theory tells you? Necessity theory gives you that the power to tax is the attribute of sovereignty emanating from necessity. So there is tax because it is a necessity. So tax is a necessity. Tax is a necessity. Why? For what use? It is for national defense, for health, for education, for public utilities, for public infrastructures. So those are the necessities in which we need tax. Those are the necessities in which we need tax. So theory of taxation, necessity theory. Next, we have your lifeblood doctrine. Another doctrine in which it tells you why do we need taxation, or it answers why do we need taxation. So lifeblood doctrine. Lifeblood doctrine is the importance of taxation. It gives you the importance of taxation. Why under lifeblood doctrine? It provides that without taxes, the government is paralyzed and cannot operate. Without taxes, the government is paralyzed and cannot operate. So lifeblood doctrine. Why? Without your blood, you do not have a life. Without your blood, you do not have a life. So in the government, the blood of the government is the tax. Without the tax, the government cannot work. Without the tax, the government cannot work, because the tax gives the fund so that the government can defray its expenses and can operate. So again, from our tax, the government will use our tax to operate and defray expenses. So without tax, the government is paralyzed or without life. Okay? So the blood of the government is the tax so that the government has a life. Okay? Third one, we have your benefits protection theory or reciprocal duties theory. In this benefits protection theory or reciprocal duties theory, it is also known as your basis of taxation. Again, answers why do we need taxation? Or why is there taxation? So we have here the government and we have here your citizen or the people. So the government will provide benefits or protection to the people. So when we say benefits, that can either be in the form of your infrastructure, health, education, etc. Protection through the police power, of course, for our citizens. And the citizen, in turn, should reciprocate the benefit or protection given to them. That is in the form of taxes. So there is a reciprocal exchange between the government and the citizen. The government will give benefit or protection. The citizen will in turn give taxes to the government. That is the benefit protection theory or reciprocal duties theory. Again, this theories of taxation answers why there is a need of taxation or why is there a power of taxation. We proceed. We go now to the different concepts of taxation and discuss the surrounding concepts regarding the law of taxation. So concept of taxation, first, theories of cost allocation. So theories of cost allocation. What do we mean by theories of cost allocation? When we say theories of cost allocation, we learn how does the government allocates its cost. How does the government allocates its cost? Remember, from taxes, we defray the cost of the government. Therefore, when we say, how does the government allocate its costs, how do we tax? How do we tax? How do we tax? So we tax based on two theories. First is benefit received. Second is ability to pay. Okay? Benefit received and ability to pay. Ability to pay. So first, benefit received. So you are taxed more if you receive more benefits. So greater benefit, greater tax. Lesser benefit, lesser tax. Okay? So greater benefit, greater tax, lesser benefit, lesser tax. So the cost of the government through the taxes will be allocated through benefit received. We look as to the benefit of the taxpayer. Okay, so we look as to the benefit of the taxpayer. If the taxpayer benefits more, more tax. If the taxpayer benefits less, less tax. Next, we have your ability to pay. Ability to pay. So under your ability to pay theory, we look as to your taxation as being levied according to the ability of the taxpayer to pay. Ability of the taxpayer to pay. So when we say ability of the taxpayer to pay, if the taxpayer is rich, of course, the taxpayer must pay more. If the taxpayer earns more, pay more. Rich, pay more. If the taxpayer have less, then pay less. Okay? Have less, pay less. Okay, so again, in your theories of cost allocation, we learn how do we allocate the cost of the government. And remember, the cost of your government comes from your taxes. So in short, how do we get your taxes? So how do we levy or impose your taxes? So based on benefit received and ability to pay. Based on benefit received and ability to pay. Next, we go to the next concept of taxation. These are your principles or canons of sound tax system. Principles or canons of sound tax system. So what is this concept of taxation? So these principles or canons of sound tax system are attributes. These are attributes of a better or sound tax law or tax system. Okay, so principles or canons of sound tax system gives you the different attributes of better or sound tax law or tax system. So with this, we can say that our tax system is sound or our tax system is great or better. So we start with the first principle, which is your fiscal adequacy. When we say fiscal adequacy, we thought about your tax as adequate to cover the expenses of the government. Okay, so tax as adequate to cover the expenses of the government. So meaning, is the current tax system or tax law sufficient to cover the expenditures and other public needs? Then, if yes, we say that our tax law or tax system is fiscally adequate. So it is adequate if ever it is sufficient. And normally, our rule here, the amount of tax collected must be equal or enough to meet our government expenditures. So it must be enough to meet our government expenditures. So must be enough to meet our government expenditures. But what if our tax is greater than our government expenditures? Or our tax is lesser than our government expenditures? If our tax is greater than our government expenditures, it means that we have a surplus. We have a surplus. We have a surplus on the collection of tax. But if our tax is lesser than the government expenditures, we have a deficit. We have a deficit. So fiscal adequacy talks about the adequacy or sufficiency of our tax to cover our expenses or the government expenses and also the public needs of the government. Next, we have your equality or theoretical justice. Equality or theoretical justice. So when we talk about equality or theoretical justice, this is a justice as to the imposition of taxes. Justice as to imposition of taxes. So when we say justice into imposition of taxes, we talk about your theories of cost allocation. We talk about your theories of cost allocation, and we have learned the ability to pay principle. So we base your equality or theoretical justice based on your ability to pay principle or your theory of cost allocation. Next, we have your administrative feasibility. What does your administrative feasibility mean? Administrative feasibility means it must be feasible to be, what do you call this? Effectively enforced. Okay, so it must be feasible to be effectively enforced. So if ever we have our tax law, the tax law can be or is capable to be effectively enforced. Okay, so we say our tax system or our tax law is sound if the three items are present. It is fiscally adequate. It is enough to cover our expenses and public needs. There is theoretical justice based on the ability to pay principle. And there is administrative feasibility because it can be effectively enforced. So how do we enforce our tax law? It is enforced by the executive through the Bureau of Internal Revenue concurrently with your Department of Finance. Okay, so BIR really is the one who enforces our tax laws. Okay, so that's the second concept of taxation that we need to learn. The principles or canons of sound tax system. Next, we go to another concept. We go with the purpose of taxation. So what is the purpose of taxation? We keep on repeating this one. Taxation is an enforced contribution to raise revenue for the government to defray its expenses. How about the other purposes? First is to regulate. How does your tax regulate? So your taxation or power of taxation regulates in case of, let's say there is an inflation, there is a deflation or there is an economic or social stability or social control, we use your power of taxation to minimize or regulate those items. So for example, there is a deflation. There is a deflation period of lower prices. So halos yung mga prices natin pababa ng pababa na. So if it's purely going down, what should you do so that the price will go up? You impose higher tax. By imposing higher tax, of course, some or most of the citizens will try to affect that higher tax to their prices so that the tax is already covered with the price. So by that, the tax regulated the deflation. Also, you can use this regulation to regulate businesses. For example, cigarette vendor, a cigarette company or cigarette vendor, and you don't want cigarette here in the Philippines. So you impose 100% taxation for cigarette manufacturers. By that, you regulated it already. Wala nang magbebenta ng cigarette. Okay, so that's one purpose of taxation or other purpose. Next is to compensate benefits provided to the people. This is your benefit protection theory or reciprocal duties theory. So remember, government will provide benefits or protection to the citizens. The citizens in turn will pay taxes. The citizens in turn will pay taxes to the government. Okay, so purpose of taxation, primary, to raise revenue, to defray the expenses of the government. Other purpose, to regulate and to compensate. Next, we go to the nature of taxation as a concept of taxation. Okay, nature of taxation as a concept of taxation. First nature of taxation, it is inherent power of the state. It is inherent power of the state. So when we say it is the inherent power of the state, we said that whenever the state is born, the power of taxation is also born with it. Next, it is exclusively lodged to the legislative. Only the legislative has the power to tax. Only the legislative has the power to tax, meaning they have the power to pass tax laws. In the exemption of the three items, remember, what are the three items again? First, that is the power of the president to impose custom duties, taxes, wharfage dues, etc. Second, the power of the local government units to impose taxes or local taxes. Third, for admin implementation, or administrative implementation under your executive. You know this one as your revenue regulations. So the BIR together with your Department of Finance can also give revenue regulations for the implementation of the law. Okay, revenue regulations. Next, it is subject to limitations. We said that taxation is subject to limitations. And what are those limitations again? It can either be inherent limitation, or it can also be constitutional limitation. Okay, so we said the power of taxation is not unlimited because it is subject to limitations, whether inherent or constitutional. Next, it is not a contract between the state and its citizen. It is not a contract between the state and its citizen. Why? Because in a contract, there is a reciprocal exchange. So normally, contract is bilateral. So the creditor and debtor of each other, so they need to exchange items, normally, reciprocal exchange. Why is taxation not a contract? So have you, I know you're done with obligations and contracts. You've learned about legal tie. So what are the legal ties of obligations again? We have 5 items, right? So that can be from contracts, quasi-contracts, delicts, quasi-delicts, and law. So those are the legal tie or vinculum juris. That's why there is an obligation. Now, taxation is not a contract. So the legal tie of taxation is not contract. The legal tie of taxation is law. It is from tax laws. Therefore, there is no contract between the state and its citizen. Meaning, the citizens cannot demand from the state regarding the duty of the state. So for example, hindi pwedeng sabihin ng citizen na, hindi ako magbabayad ng tax. Wala naman akong nare-receive from the state. That is wrong. That is wrong. Why? Because whether or not the citizen benefits from the state, the citizen must pay. Remember, taxation is an enforced contribution. And take note, guys, you cannot tell that you did not receive anything because whether it is actual or constructive, you need to pay. Whether it is actual or constructive, you need to pay. When we say actual, you really benefited actually. Constructive, you did not really benefit directly. However, you benefit indirectly. So for example, just by using the road, you are already benefiting indirectly. Okay, so there is no contract. You cannot deny payment because you are into a contract. Because the legal tie comes from your law or tax law. Next, it is not political in nature. It is not political in nature. So it is always based on the occupied territory or on the state. It's not political in nature. It is based on the territory or the state. So what do we mean by political in nature? So whoever controls the state or the territory, it is not them in which you are obliged to pay taxes. So for example, Philippines is controlled by Japan. Japan controls Philippines. So when we say it is not political in nature, taxation is paid based on the territory or the state. So even if Japan controls Philippines, you do not pay taxes on Japan. You pay taxes on Philippines because it is based on the territory or the state. It is not the one who controls the political state of the country, but it is the country itself or the state in which you pay taxes. So it is not political in nature, not based on politics. It is not based on who controls the country. It is based on the country itself or a state. Take note, because the power of taxation is inherent on the state. So it's not based on who controls it. It is based on the state itself. So based on Philippines for that. Okay. Next, the power of taxation is non-delegable. We already said that. It is non-delegable because it is only lodged in the legislative, except on the three items. The power of president, LGU, and administrative implementation. I will also add last one, number 7. Taxation is civil in nature and not penal in nature. Taxation is civil in nature and not penal in nature. Okay, taxation is civil in nature and not penal in nature. Why? Because taxation is not against criminals. So normally it is not penal in nature kasi hindi naman talaga siya against criminals. It is civil because it is imposed by a law. And your obligation arises on the law. Kaya siya civil. Obligation based on law. Based on law. It is not an obligation based on crime. It is not an obligation based on crime. But later on, you will learn that taxation can also impose penalty. But as to the nature only, it is civil, it is not penal. So when we say it can be penal also, that is due to the penalties being a taxpayer. So for example, nakalimutan mo magbayad on time or hindi ka nagde-declare ng tax mo, hindi yun penal in nature. Penalty yun kasi hindi ka talaga nagbayad ng obligation mo. Okay? Hindi siya yung based on crime. So it is civil in nature, not penal in nature. So nature of taxation, remember these items, inherent in the state until it is civil and not penal in nature. We go now to another concept of taxation, that is the characteristics of taxation. Characteristics of taxation. So what are the characteristics of taxation? First, comprehensive. Okay, we have already discussed this a while back. When we say comprehensive, it covers anything. It covers anything. So any subject matter. So it can be persons, it can be activities, it can be professions, it can be businesses, it can be rights, it can be privileges. So you can cover anything. You can tax anything with the power of taxation. How about unlimited? When we say unlimited, it is only unlimited as to amount. It is only unlimited as to amount. Next, we have here plenary. What do we mean by plenary? Our tax laws are complete by its nature. Complete by its nature. Lastly, supreme. Comprehensive and supreme goes together. Comprehensive and supreme goes together. So it is supreme as to the selection of subject matter. So remember, we said you can cover anything. Therefore, you can select any subject matter. You can select any subject matter. So characteristics of taxation, we have comprehensive, unlimited, plenary, and supreme. So under your concepts of taxation, we have discussed several items from the theories of cost allocation, principles of sound tax system, the purpose of taxation, the nature of taxation, and also the characteristics of taxation.